Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Today is a webinar about buying a business with little or no money down. Um, we'll talk about some of the nuances and some of the basic parameters of getting that done. So today we're going to talk about what it takes to be an entrepreneur and if it's something that you should even be doing. We're going to talk about the criteria that you should use to select a business. We're going to talk about finding the right business. Um, we're going to discover how to quickly know what any company is worth. We're going to talk about the financing aspect of getting a business with little or no money down. We're going to talk about the SBA, particularly how COVID has affected SBA loans. We're going to talk about the balance sheet, the P&L, and the cash flow statements, as well as adjusted cash flow. We're going to talk about how to determine value if the financials are really bad, which is almost always the case. We're going to talk about how to do the calculation for adjusted cash flow and why it matters. We're going to talk about when to do an asset sale versus a stock sale, the benefits and some of the cons of doing either one. We're going to talk about how to buy a business and turn it around. A lot of businesses out there because of COVID are in pretty bad shape, but not for COVID, they'd be fine. And after COVID, they'll probably be fine. So that could be an opportunity to buy a really great business at a very low price. We're going to talk about franchise resales, particularly, and the bargains that they can represent if you do it the right way. We're going to talk about what I like to say the right things wrong in a business that can make the business perfect. And almost no business is perfect. So there's always an opportunity to do some things better. And hopefully that'll offer some kind of discount for you when you purchase it. Buying a business during a pandemic has its certain challenges, and we'll talk about those. And also, we do offer a training program, so we'll talk about that at the very, very end. So without further ado, let's get going here. So 60% of all jobs are created by small businesses, so they're just absolutely important to our economy. There's over 23 million small businesses. They represent 97% of all U.S. exports of goods, and they produce 13 times more patents per employee than large companies. So how do you know if you're an entrepreneur, if you have what it takes to be an entrepreneur? Well, we have a little quiz that we do. It's kind of a fun quiz, and it's something that I'll share with you at the end of this in a handout. In fact, I'll make a handout available that speaks to all the different items that we'll be discussing in this webinar. So real quick, my journey as an entrepreneur, I started with a startup and I did a series of acquisitions and then I basically sold the company. The photograph there, I'm a dude in the red box, and that was the day I actually sold the company. So I really took that experience and it kind of gave me really the experience to talk about the stuff I'm talking about now. So it's really from doing, and a lot of it was doing it the wrong way. So hopefully I'd be able to just describe the better way to do it. So after I sold the company, I became an author, a speaker, and business advisor. I founded a company called Biz Profit Pro. And also I authored 7 Pills of Profit and also the Ultimate Guide to Sell a Business, which is an ebook. 7 Pills of Profit is a regular hard copy book. So I mentioned about finding the right business. And the first thing I want to say is that the purpose of a business is to make money. Your hobby is something you do after work. If you can find something that you really enjoy doing, that's your passion, and it's your business, that's great. But you really want to look for a business that really can make you money, profits through your hobbies or in your spare time. So a lot of bad parts about a business are the things that you kind of don't want to do. So when you're looking at a business, let's say it's something that's totally outside of your experience, that you don't like it. But if it's set up properly, it could be still a good business. So let me talk about establishing search criteria. So this allows you to narrow the field down to things that are likely companies that you can acquire and actually own. So the first obvious one is gross sales. So gross sales is basically how much gross revenue the company makes in a year. Now, as a general rule of thumb, a company should bring about 10% to the bottom line, plus or minus maybe 5% or so. So if a company's doing $1 million in sales, you'd expect $100,000 to go to the bottom line as far as owner benefit or income. So when you think about gross sales, you should be thinking about how much money do I want to make out of this business? So if I want to make 100 grand, I need a business that has gross sales of $1 million. So I might set up a search criteria to say, hey, I'm going to look for businesses between 850 and maybe 1.5 million to get something in my sweet spot. The next thing you want to look at is number of employees. These are basic things that you can search for in most of the business for sale websites and other places. So we like to use this as another search criteria. Every employee generally represents about $100,000 in gross revenue. So if I have 10 employees, I would expect to be doing about $1 million. It changes by industry. If it's, for example, more of a web property versus a brick and mortar, well, those numbers are very different. And typically a online type store is going to have less employees per dollar of gross sales. The other thing to look at are industries. You don't want to be all over the place. You want to kind of focus on industries that it makes sense for you because you have some kind of experience in the industry, or just have the knowledge to basically pull it off, maybe from your work experience, maybe from your formal education, maybe from what you've been studying and researching. Also, when you do by industry, you can look at something called zip codes, which basically are industry codes that allow you to do far deeper searches on all the major databases. The other thing is location. You want to do location by as tight or as wide as you need it. If you want to travel, you might be all over the country. If you're really specific, you might be down to a zip code. So that really pares down your search by just doing that. The other thing is business type. Are you looking for a product or a service company? So if you use these major criteria, you can really make your search go a lot easier. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is seller discretionary earnings. Now, this is probably the most important thing that we'll talk about this whole webinar. So small companies or micro businesses are typically less than $500,000. They might have a couple of employees, and they typically get a multiple of 2. And what that means is that it's a multiple of earnings. So if a company that's making, let's say it's making 500,000, so I expect 50,000 to go to the bottom line. So it's 50,000 times 2. So the company would be worth about $100,000. Now, these numbers are going to really vary widely, because if a company's doing 500,000, they might have 5 people or 2 people. The owner might be doing kind of double duty. So you got to normalize this for a reasonable kind of business. And what I mean by that is, if you've got an owner that's working 80 hours a week, I consider that unreasonable. Not that you shouldn't work hard, but that's not a sustainable type model that you want to get yourself involved in. We want companies that fit your lifestyle and that make you a reasonable return for the time you're spending in the company. Now, as the company gets larger, the multiples go up. So if we're looking at a Main Street company, which we consider 500,000 to about $1 million, the multiple goes up to 2.8. So if the company is doing $1 million, that company is going to be doing about $100,000 in bottom line revenue or cash flow. So the company is going to be worth about $280,000. Now, these are just guidelines to just get a ballpark of where you are, but it really gives you a real insight into if it even makes sense just at first glance. So if you go to what we call sort of upper Main Street, where you have up to 25 employees and they can be doing up to $2 million, the multiple goes up to 3.3. So let's just use, 2 million. So that's $200,000 to the bottom line. So that's going to be about $660,000 for a value of that company. Now, there's a ton of things that you look at in addition to this, but this is just a real rough way to get an idea of where you are. And then mid-market is up to about 60 employees. Now they're doing about a multiple of 4.4, and it's a company between 2 to 5 million. Oddly enough, the size of the company may make it easier to acquire with less money, because a company that's doing a couple million, 3 million, will have the layers of management in place typically, and have all of the processes and operations pretty much dialed in to where somebody can come in as an executive and operate that company. So you can't get too stuck on the multiples. It's just a beginning glance at what the company is going to be basically worth. So I want to talk about how do you really get a company with little or nothing down. So where it really starts is seller financing is a huge part of getting the deal done. Currently, the owner will hold a note between 10 to 80%. Usually they're going to be a lot closer to 10 than to 80, because obviously they're trying to sell the company and they want to get out of the risk and transfer to somebody else like you in a bank. So if you can get ideally 20% or 25% seller note, you can take that to the bank and use that as your down payment. There's a couple of steps you have to do to make that work, but that's the general sense of how you can get a company with little or nothing down. There's bridge financing, other things that you might have to do to make that work, because the bank wants you to have some skin in the game. So if you come in and say, well, I'm going to put nothing in this company and I want to own it, the bank's going to say no, generally speaking. So what you want to do is have some kind of bridge financing that allows you to have the down payment, whatever you need, and then as soon as you close, you can take the money back out of the company and repay that bridge loan. A bridge loan is basically a loan that you have as a bridge to get you through just a very short period of time, which could be 90 days, 6 months, that kind of thing. The next vehicle is an earnout. Now, an earnout is typically used when you don't have, there's typically some kind of risk where, let's say there's a customer concentration issue where there's one large customer, or you just don't trust the books. You don't trust if the customer is going to stay because the owner was so involved in the company. So earnout is pegged against future sales. So as you operate the company and as the company continues to perform, generally like it was prior to you taking ownership, you would pay accordingly based on the performance of the company. So that takes a lot of risk off the table, and it's a form of financing. The other big thing you can do is refinance the company. So to give you an example, if you were to buy a house that's worth, we'll make it easy, $250,000, but the owner has to get out really, really fast, it will sell to you for $200,000. So if you were to buy that company or that house for $200,000, you could turn around and basically finance the entire thing, because that's going to be, you're going to have more than 20% equity in the house in day one. So you would just get a bridge to get you to acquire the house, and then you would immediately refinance to get the money back out for the outlay that you have to get the property acquired. It's a combination of these sort of principles that really get you a deal. Every deal is going to be different. You want to look at what's the owner trying to do and try to formulate the things that basically get him close to where they want to be and get you to where you want to be. Here's an example of a muffler shop. So we have something called rules of thumb, and it's sort of like looking at the multiples I described, but there's some other rules of thumb as well. So for example, a muffler shop is valued at 35 to 40% of annual sales plus inventory. So if this muffler shop is doing $1 million, it's worth about $350,000 to $400,000. Or it's SDE, which is seller discretionary earnings plus inventory. So now when I look at that, I'm going to say, well, the inventory is an asset that I might be able to leverage to help finance a thing. So if he's got, let's just say it's worth $400,000 and he's got $100,000 worth of inventory. Well, why buy the inventory on day one? I might finance it. As I sell it, I'll pay the seller for his inventory as opposed to buying it all at once on day one. So that's another form of financing. Okay, so I want to talk about franchises because they really offer basically a mathematical advantage. And here's why. So there was a franchise resale that I looked at very recently. It was doing gross sales of 173, which not great. My guess is that it's just a underperforming franchise because the guy either got burnt out or something happened. So the guy's been in business for 16 years. Asking price is 79,000. So 173 isn't a huge company, obviously, but it's a pretty good start. You got some customers, you got some processes in place, and you got 16 years of history. Versus same franchise, brand new, you have zero sales, 0 years in business, and it costs almost twice as much, 139,515, and there's no owner financing. In my strategy, I'm looking to get these franchises like so at 173, and the owner holds a note for, let's say if we can get 20% out of the owner, I can finance this company or this franchise for little or nothing down, and I have processes in place. I have the assistance of the franchise because they want you to be successful, because they want you to pay their royalty. So it's a good deal if you find the right situation. So the capacity to raise money are based on a few things. One is your assets. To be clear, the bank or seller is not going to loan you any money without you having some sort of credibility and some sort of capacity. So it can come in the form of assets. If you own your home, a vacation home, rental property, whatever, those are assets. And I'll talk about how we can use those in a second. Also, big thing, deal making knowledge. You want to be able to be creative and to offer different scenarios that helps the owner get what they want out of the deal. They may not want money as much as they want the company to survive, the employees to be taken care of, the customers to be taken care of, and just to continue their legacy. So understand what they really, really need and try to give them as much of that as you can. It's not always just about the money. Industry experience. You don't have to have all these things, but you need some of these things to make your deal work. So if I've got 10, 15 years in a particular industry and I'm buying a company in that industry, I want to make a big deal out of that. I want to say to the owner, the seller, how much I understand the industry and how much I can take care of his baby, his company. And most importantly, pay him back any money that he should loan to me in the form of a seller note. And the bank likes that as well, by the way. Credit score. Your credit score is important. None of these things is a deal breaker or deal maker, but putting them all together is how you do a deal. You want to cobble together the components that make you look as good as you can and offer that to the seller. Bankability of the business. Now, bankability of the business is basically the muffler shop I talked about. If it's worth $400,000 and there's $100,000 in inventory, well, right off the back, I got $100,000 in inventory that I can use for financing. Don't buy the inventory on day one. Why would you spend $100,000? You can spend zero, and as you sell off the inventory, then you pay for it. So you'd be paying for the inventory at cost, and you would get your markup. So there's some cash flow coming from the inventory, and the seller is getting exactly what he paid for it, so he's not really hurting. All right. Probably the biggest thing is not being a jerk. And what that means is that you're essentially applying for a loan, not just from the bank, but also from the seller. So anything you can do to make that seller feel comfortable with your industry knowledge, your credit score, how you treat everyone, including the seller, everyone around you, employees, your experience, your resume, all those things matter. The seller note is probably the biggest thing that makes a deal. The banks love to see the seller involved, knowing that if the seller's got a seller note out there, he's got to help the new owner be successful. So everyone's kind of in it together. And also it reduces their exposure. All right. So I can't say enough how important it is to not be a jerk. Being cordial, being punctual, do what you say you're going to do is extremely important. From the first time you talk to a seller to the very last time you ink a deal. So now we want to talk about the numbers. And let me just start by saying that don't expect to get all these statements. You might get some of them, you might get none of them, but we'll talk about how to work through that. So we'll talk about the balance sheet, the P&L statement, the cash flow statement, and the adjusted cash flow. All right. So the balance sheet reports the company's assets, liabilities, and shareholders' equity at a specific point in time. This is going to give me some clues as to how much inventory is there, what's the equipment worth, or what they say it's worth. So you kind of get a treasure map of where things are. So some companies won't have a balance sheet, by the way, and instead of a balance sheet, what you might get is an equipment list, which is not the same thing, but it's a less sophisticated way of knowing where their stuff is. You want to know all the stuff this company basically owns, as well as how much do they owe on that stuff. The balance sheet will describe that on the liability side, and the asset will have their stuff or their equipment. So we want these just to find out how we're going to make this deal work. So the balance sheet is sort of like, think of it as a big equipment list, and it says how much they owe on all the equipment. So it's the assets as the equipment or anything else they consider an asset. And then you've got how much is owed on it. So that's going to be bank loans, it's going to be leases, all that stuff, because part of the strategy might be to absorb some of those liabilities as a form of financing. All right. So now we'll talk about the profit and loss statement. And profit and loss statement is kind of what it sounds like. Basically, it describes how much money the company is making or losing. Now, when we look at this for our purposes, we always want to reconcile this with the tax return. So the tax return is our base core document, and we're going to basically look at all of the sales, cost of goods sold, expenses, and then figure out what the profit and loss is. And one thing I didn't mention was there's a lot of discretionary expenditures going on in these kinds of things, and you have to understand exactly what those things are. So a discretionary expense might be a luxury car, it might be fancy vacations that has nothing to do with the business, but they do it to reduce their taxable income. Very common, and this is where I think people can get a lot of deals that otherwise nobody would do, because you can understand what's happening. You really got to understand what the numbers are saying to you. The cash flow statement is basically cash coming in, cash going out. This is important because you might be profitable and still go out of business simply because of how your receivables come in. Sometimes it could be lumpy. So for example, if you have a manufacturing company and they're buying a whole bunch of titanium because they're going to machine it into something else, and the titanium might cost them a couple $100,000, and it might take them 4 or 5 months to build it because they have to bring in the titanium material, pay for it, and then process it. But they may not have the money to pay for it and keep up with payroll and everything else. So you got to understand your cash flow and the velocity of money. So what I recommend is that you work with an accountant to give you some of the basics, but some of the stuff is more for entrepreneurs, in that most accountants will look at financials and say, well, this is terrible. I would never buy this business. Well, you got to look at it a different way. Us as entrepreneurs, we have to look at it as, if I were running the business, what would my discretionary expenses be? Would it be paying for my truck, my car? Would it be paying for my other discretionary stuff? So don't discount things too quickly. Take the time to understand some of these financial statements. Now, adjusted cash flow is, I don't know, it's the one that gets the most attention because that's kind of like take out all the BS. That number really means something. Cash flow is how much money I get at the end of the year, basically. So that really takes out all the fluff and all that kind of stuff. So um, it subtracts the non-cash expenses, which is like depreciation, amortization, things like that, which are made up by the IRS, but it's not really a thing. So because I'm writing off $20,000 in depreciation, doesn't mean I'm getting $20,000 less. It doesn't. It's just a framework set up by the IRS that I won't get into now, but basically, uh, I'll show you a company that is actually losing money on paper, but really making a lot of money in real life. So I did work with a company, this was a few years ago now, but they had a top line revenue number of roughly 900 to $1 million. And they showed a IRS loss of between what is $13,000 to $85,000, which sounds terrible. Who would buy something like that? Well, when you take a deeper dive and you look at what was actually happening, they had a loss from a decade earlier that they were still basically writing future income off on. So their actual cash flow was between $120,000 to $313,000. So a deal that might look bad for a lot of people is actually a good deal when you tear it apart and see what's actually happening. So learning how to do the adjusted cash flow from tax returns is something that you have to be able to do and basically recast the financials as we call them. Now, having said that, most financial statements you're ever going to see are going to be either incomplete or you just can't trust them for one reason or another, or they're just going to be a mess. Businesses that are the smaller the company, the least reliable the books are going to be because the books are only for the benefit of the owner, not for the world, like in a publicly traded company. So with that being said, you want to be able to kind of go behind the scenes to see what's happening. So for example, if I was buying, let's say, a laundromat, well, the big metric there is looking at their water bill and utility bill. As the utility bill rises and falls, that's going to be proportional to what they're likely doing in sales. No one's going to run empty washers and dryers. So we expect those things to be reflective of what the gross revenue is. So if I know the gross revenue number can be trusted, or I can peg it to water bill and utility bills and say, okay, if that number is stable, I can assume that the gross sales number is probably going to be, somewhat stable. There's typically going to be seasonality, but there should be some trends. So if I look at 3 years of tax returns, which is typically what I like to do, sometimes if I'm really not trusting things, I might try to go back for more. But 3 years typically should do it, and you should see some trends, trending up, trending down, choppy, but you should be able to find what's happening there. The other thing you can look at is, how many employees. If they've got 10 employees and they say their gross sales is 200,000, that just isn't right. And that's full-time people. So they're probably underreporting income, which, by the way, most people don't underreport income. They overstate expenses, typically is what they do, unless it's a cash business, and that's a little bit different. So in the cash business, what I really care about in the cash business is, well, depending on what it is, I want to do things like visit them and go and collect the cash register tape or whatever they're using for their POS or point of sale system on random times to see what are they doing on the weekends, what are they doing in the mornings, what are they doing on Sundays, that kind of thing. So there are ways to work around if you don't have good books, but you have to be a little creative and just be a little patient and also pay close attention to what the seller tells you. I mean, are they telling you a bunch of lies, or are they consistent saying the same thing every time? And look for ways to confirm what they say. A lot of times the employees, um, if you have an option to talk to any of them, at some point in your due diligence, you might ask some questions that are just confirming what the seller said, realizing the sensitivity of you talking to an employee is going to be very sensitive, and they're going to be very guarded about what they're going to have the employee tell you. So be careful about what you ask and be very respectful. So most deals that we look at are going to be done as asset sales. An asset sale is the simplest way to basically get a deal done, because you're not actually buying the company, you're actually buying the assets. So if I'm buying, we'll go back to the muffler company for a second. So if I'm buying a muffler shop, I'm only buying the inventory, the um, the goodwill. The goodwill is the customer list, it's the telephone numbers, it's the trademarks, all that kind of stuff. But what I'm not buying is I'm not buying their accounts payable, I'm not getting their accounts receivable, or most importantly, none of their liabilities. So if somebody is suing them, that really doesn't matter to you at all. Okay. Um, in the case of a stock sale, you're buying everything. So if somebody is suing them, you now become the owner of that lawsuit. Now, there's a bunch of things you can do to mitigate that risk, obviously, which is really what your attorney will do for you. Like they'll search for, if they are being sued, what are all the liabilities out there? And there's other things you can do as well, where you, for example, you can escrow certain monies. So the seller doesn't get the escrowed money until a certain period of time or until certain things are resolved. Like, for example, if you're collecting accounts receivables and they don't perform, or you don't get the money, that could be held up in escrow until they pay, as an example. There's also, you can be as creative as you want to try to take care of some unforeseen type things. And the best thing is, if you have a seller note, well, let's make something up really quick. So if I'm really worried about something being out there, maybe I'll ask for, well, I need a 35% seller note. And if something happens that was not disclosed, I'm going to make the adjustment on the payments I owe you out in the future. So it gives you more security, and it gives you a way to basically claw back some money, so you end up getting a better deal. The other time I would go with a stock sale is when, let's say, they've got a liquor license and it would take me forever to get a liquor license, or even never. So the liquor license might be a really important thing I need to keep this thing going. So in that case, it'd be a stock sale. Or let's say the company has a very large government contract or any kind of contract, and you want to keep that contract with the current terms in place. Well, just do it as a stock sale and you get everything, because nothing has changed at all. The other case that you might do something like that is where you have all of the vendors set up. And if you were to open up a new LLC or C Corp or whatever you want to do, you have to reapply for all those trade lines again, which may not be a big deal if it's only a few, but if it's a lot and really big relationships, like we got a negotiated commodity contracts in place, like for steel or some raw materials, you might want to go to stock sale for that reason. Every deal is different, and you have to really just kind of get under the hood and see what's there and see what the liabilities are. Certain companies don't have much liability. Like, for example, I would say, let's say you're buying a web design company. Well, there probably isn't going to be a huge amount of exposure, because it's a digital product for the most part. It's a service, and the kind of problems you're going to have is maybe it's a quality problem, maybe something wasn't executed as planned, but it's not going to be catastrophic, like somebody finding out that your product is giving people cancer. That would be catastrophic, as an example. So I often say, finding the right things wrong in a business can make a business perfect. And what I mean by that is, first of all, no business is perfect, but a business that might seem like it's really not a great deal, when you peel the onion a little bit, it could be a good deal. So a the right things wrong in the business are things that you can fix. So if I'm really a strong marketing guy, for example, and I find a business that has really no sales and marketing efforts being made, that might be a perfect business for me because I can, if they've got a good operation and good product or service, and I come in and I add my marketing skills to it, that can be a nice, um, a great business because of that. You have to identify these places where they're weak and you're strong. In fact, people want to buy the perfect business and it doesn't exist. There's so much opportunity for people that can do this, that can look at a business and say, the business is really underperforming, but if I were to make this change, I'm confident it could do a lot better. A lot of buying companies is about understanding what it's not doing well. And a lot of businesses, or most, are a reflection of its owner. So if the owner is really good at R&D or really good at operations or really good at marketing sales, well, that's what you're going to get. So what they don't do well is going to be reflected in most companies that you're going to look at this scale. As you get larger companies, those weak spots are filled in by professionals that do it. You know, you're gonna have a marketing guy, you're gonna have a sales guy, you're gonna have an operations guy, you're gonna have an R&D guy, you're gonna have a person that takes care of human resources, et cetera, et cetera. But the smaller you go, the more it's a reflection of the buyer, and you can find things that are wrong that you may be able to really correct. So I talk about how to turn around a business, and there's really some basic things I like to talk about. I also talk about this in my book, 7 Pillars of Profit. And they're really basic. They're almost so basic they seem like it's just common sense. The first thing is SCORE. SCORE is Senior Core of Retired Executives, and these guys offer free mentoring. They tend to be knowledgeable people that have good connections in industry in general, and they're just good people to know. So pick up the phone, call the 800 number, go online, and you can sign up in like 5 minutes. It's really, really easy, but let them know what you're doing. They can really help out, even just from a networking standpoint. I can't stress this enough. You got to buy it right. If you buy a business during COVID and the business is a non-essential business and it's been getting killed, well, when you buy it, you have to discount for how long is it going to take for the company to get back to where it was pre-COVID, and that may not even be great. So you got to figure out how you're going to get this business to be the profit level you'd like it to be. Okay, so buying it right is the most important thing. If you do that wrong, everything else is never going to work. Next is accounting. Businesses that are performing poorly typically have bad accounting practices. It tends to be sort of sloppy. It tends to be not looked at as much as it should. The owner doesn't have a good handle on his cost. There's typically places where they're basically bleeding money and they shouldn't be. The other thing I have to stress is networking. Um, Discipline yourself after you acquire any company to network at least once a month. Obviously, we're not doing face to face now, but you can do other stuff. Um, so make that a big part of what you do. Next thing is reading. Um, I would like to see everyone read about 2 to 3 books a quarter on business. All the stuff you need is out there. The roadmaps are out there. Just read the books. The other thing is spend about 10% on sales and marketing. When you look at companies that are underperforming, look at what they're spending on their advertising, their marketing. Depending on the size of the company, they might have a sales guy, they may not. They might be using print advertising, online advertising, pay-per-click, whatever they're using, trade shows. But see what they're doing. A lot of companies are doing 1%, 2%, or like zero. You're not going to be successful without advertising, period. Model. I'm a big fan of modeling what the leaders in the industry are doing. Model what your competitors are doing that's better than what you're doing. It's simple. Google them and say, hey, what are these guys doing? What are they doing on their website? What are they doing on their service? What's their product mix like? Model people that are doing things right that are basically making money. Model other industries. And for example, if I have a restaurant, I might model, Chick-fil-A or Burger King or someone that matches up with me. Not that you're a huge corporation like that, but certain things they do, you can basically model that and help your company. And this is kind of a plug for my book, Seven Pillars of Profit, which, by the way, um, you can get for free as a ebook. You can buy it on Amazon as well, but I want to share that with you for coming to this webinar today. All right. So if you do the things that I'm talking about here, you can turn around just about any business. And this stuff is easy. Read books, make sure the accounting is done. You can outsource accounting to somebody and make sure it's done properly and focus on your numbers. I'll say the top line, gross sales numbers, any expenses. There's always a bunch of things people are spending money on that they shouldn't be when things basically aren't going well. All right. So we've covered a lot of material, and I wanted to make sure that I had a way of sharing my notes with you. So if you go to bizprofitpro.com/handout, you'll see a place where you can basically get all the information I just shared with you today with some of my comments about it. So I share with you at the very beginning that we do have a program, a training program that we basically, it has 23 modules, and it talks about everything we talked about, but it goes in depth. The other thing that it does is it gives you access to us. So basically you can schedule calls with us and talk about, hey, I looked at this deal. What do you think? What should I pay for this? How to do an LOI? Now, we describe how to do these things in great detail in our program. But in addition to that, you can have somebody to help walk you through the process. Now, you have to do you have to do work. We're just here to be your sounding board and to give you some feedback as to what we think. For example, writing a business plan is important. We're not going to write the business plan for you, but we will take a look at it and help you craft the business plan. In our program, we do have templates to help you write a business plan. Every business plan does not need to be 80 pages. It could be 12 or 15 pages, depending on the size of the deal and what you're trying to do with it. We use a business plan, one for ourselves in terms of getting our own ideas out on paper so you can share them with people. And that includes banks. It might include the seller. It might include investors. So a business plan is just a good part of the package to have, and those are the kind of things we can talk you through. But again, you do the work. You're going to be digging through the financials and using our strategies and getting our sort of consult. So you could always book calls with us and talk about whatever it is kind of, what's going on. But there's a lot of work involved in basically buying a company, especially when you're trying to do it with little or no money. But it can be done with the right knowledge. Also, the psychology of this is very important as well, which is why we also have a buyer profile, and we also look at what we call business personality. Is actually, we can use DISC, which is actually, you can find it online. It's actually free. It tells you what your personality type is. So it'll help you when you're selecting the right business for you. It'll help you kind of decipher what's good, what's bad. I don't want to read all these different things to you because it's actually online. You can see them. This program is, you can see the whole program at www.bizbuyerpro.com. It's actually on the bottom of the slide. We also offer a 14-day money back guarantee. If you jump into the program, you say, hey, this really isn't for me. Hey, I get it. This is a huge undertaking, and it really takes quite a bit of effort to do. It's not an overnight sort of a thing. This will take you several weeks and likely several months to do. This program goes for 1 year. You have 1 year access to the program and to basically to us to get your questions answered. And we want you to be out there making offers. It's not a one and done deal. You may need to make 7, 8 offers to get one accepted, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, that's what you should expect. If somebody accepts your first offer, it may not be a good offer. So having somebody to kind of look over your shoulder, you do the work, but you have somebody to bounce things off of is a real benefit. I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen a lot of deals, a lot of companies, and it's my goal to share it with as many people as I can in this program. Obviously, from my standpoint, if I can help more people, it's better for my bottom line, but also it's good for your bottom line as well. So that is our 23 module business buyer program. I welcome anybody's comments or suggestions. And with that, I will open up to some questions. If anybody has any, just put them in the chat. Okay, I'll wait a few minutes to see if anybody's got any questions. But while we're waiting, I will talk about how important it is to really do the work when you're looking for a company to buy. It's work. It's about searching pretty much every day. We'll share with you some automations you can do to have basically a deal flow coming to your email. So you set your criteria, and then basically these different sites who send you deals that meet your criteria. So we try to streamline the process so that way you're not just wasting your time spinning your wheels on things that you can't buy, too far away, not the right industry. We want to streamline those things for you. Okay, so the question is, how long does it take to find a business? Well, it's different for everyone because it depends on where you live, what's out there, what you want, how quickly you get comfortable. I like the idea of doing a lot of just activity, talk to a bunch of sellers, get comfortable talking to these business owners because, they tend to be, I'm going to call it just weird in a way. I mean, us as entrepreneurs, me included, we're a little bit weird. We look at things in a different way. So get that sort of mentality, talk to a lot of people. The best deals don't happen overnight. You might make an offer today. They may come back to you 60 days from now and say, you know what, I won't take your offer. Or we have two offers, but we'd rather take yours because we like you better. You're not a jerk. Okay. So I would budget about 7 months to get a deal done from beginning to end, but it could be longer than that. I mean, and there's no guarantee you even get a deal because if the deal isn't good, don't take it. I don't want you to take it. There's no reason to ever take a bad deal. Okay. Do we help negotiate the deal? No, we don't help negotiate the deal. What we do is you give us what your scenario is, and we give you our recommendations based on what you're telling us. The negotiation is totally up to you. We do have a module on negotiating the deal, and we spend a lot of time talking about, one, is it priced right? Deal structure. How do you get these deals structured? And we'll advise and talk to you about that. You would book a call with us, and we would basically, you lay out, hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's the deal I'm trying to structure. What do you think about it? And we'll say, you know what, that's great, or that's bad. Let's change that up. Or we'll try to put some protections in for you with the earnout or things like that. Okay, what do I mean by selling yourself? Well, when you're doing this the way we do it, you're really trying to sell the business owner that you're a solid person that can operate the business and take it even to a higher level. So that means that you can satisfy the debt because you're basically going to be a borrower of theirs. So they need to feel pretty good about you from the very beginning. You can be very hard-nosed at negotiating while being kind, respectful, and making your case as to why you want the deal to be like it is. One thing I like to tell people is, if I were to pay you more money, I don't know if I could pay you the money back in a sub note. So for me to be comfortable doing that, I need to be here. Let the seller always know that my goal is to pay you all your money. In fact, I'd like to even pay it off early. So most deals that we do, we like to have a no penalty for early repayment. And a lot of times we'll do balloons and things like that to get the to get our cash flow up so we can have more room to kind of maneuver. But you want the seller to realize, hey, I'm driving a hard bargain so you can basically get paid. I don't. Do we look at the financials? I don't know if I understand the question. Do we look at the financials? Well, first, so we have a module on the financials that you would learn how to dig into them yourself. And then in addition to that, if you wanted us to kind of, look over your shoulder, you would book a call with us and we would do a screen share and we would look at the same materials and we would just, talk about what we see. And also we always suggest, particularly if you're really getting into the later stages of the deal, um, get your CPA involved or get an accountant involved, but realizing accountants look at things very black and white and we look at things a little differently as entrepreneurs. But we will definitely work with you on those kinds of things. It's just that we want to make it very clear that this is basically a self-paced program that's based on you doing the work and you bringing to us any issue you have and we can better explain it. But it's hard work and we want you to be prepared for it if you decide to do this. Any more questions? Do we help with financing? Well, we don't offer financing, but we help with financing. So part of our getting the money module that we have, the first thing we're going to do in that module is we're going to have you collect your 3 credit scores, which is at your expense. I think it's like $30 to do that. It's going to basically get your financial profile so we know which banks to direct you to or which banks, lenders, or alternative financing. So with that, we can basically help direct you to the best place. We want to get your money set up early in the process. So that way, when you do have something you're interested in, we're going to suggest that you put in an LOI, letter of intent, which is non-binding, and get the ball really rolling. Okay. So to get a company with little or no money, you still have to have credit score. You have to have, certain things. Whether you're sharing that with banks, whether you're sharing that with the seller, which I always like to do, let the seller know exactly who you are. Be transparent because if they're going to be your bank, you should be transparent. It'll make your offer look better than the other guy's offer. So we do spend a lot of time talking about the, getting the money and the financing and that sort of stuff. So we actually have a place where we ask you to stop and schedule a call with us so we can kind of look at the whole thing so we can better consult with you as you get deeper into getting deals done. So I don't see more questions. So I'd like to end this by talking about probably the best tool, which is I think the LOI. The LOI is really where the rubber hits the road, and that's what we want you to be doing as soon as possible, which is you're saying, I've looked at this deal, it looks pretty good, but I'm not sure about it yet. So the letter of intent just says, I'm willing to pay this for this company if it passes due diligence, which means I get to kick the tires and change my mind and change everything about the deal. So you're really not giving anything other than it's a psychological engagement with the seller. The seller thinks, hey, I've got this thing sold. And you're like, you've just started negotiating. Now, when you do due diligence, that's when you get really under the hood. You're looking at everything about the company. And there's things always that's going to be not disclosed. Oh, it turns out that the equipment's not worth what you said it was. It turns out the sales just dropped by 10% because the largest customer just stopped ordering. So those are all okay because what we want to do is be able to adjust that offer, lower the price, get better terms because of that. So what's going to be a turn off to a lot of people should be a turn on to us, a way for us to get that better deal, to get the seller to hold the bigger note. That's how we really push our initial outlay way down and buy companies that we would not be able to buy otherwise. You could buy a company that's doing $1 million, $2 million in revenue if you have the right skill sets to pull it off. I don't want to suggest that anybody can just walk up and buy a $5 million company because they can't. If you have the prerequisite skills in terms of managing people, so let's say you're doing $5 million, you might have 50, 60 employees. If you are managing 50 or 60 employees now, well, you have some of that experience already. If you have never managed anybody, well, that's probably not going to be something that's going to make sense as your first acquisition. Um, do things that make sense, that you have the actual skill sets to do, or you have researched enough to be able to do that. Okay, so I will close with that. We're I guess ending a couple minutes early, which I'm happy about. I try to get everyone out pretty soon because I know everyone is very busy. So with that, I will say goodbye to everyone, and feel free to reach me after this by email or by phone. All of my information is at bizprofitpro.com or bizbuyerpro.com. Thank you for your time today.